review, looking at RPT reviews. And then also, kind of interestingly, the work in terms of integrating DEI in the curriculum oftentimes is happening at the institutional level rather than at the departmental level. So we're not necessarily seeing DEI directly related into the fish and wildlife or environmental curriculum. So really, there were really two key priorities that came out of this survey and what some of these recommendations were. So number one, committing to deconstructing barriers to underrepresented groups in the fish and wildlife professions. So how can we make our field more inclusive? And then secondly, thinking about this with respect to work in departments, work in universities, how do we focus on inclusive pedagogy? How do we make the climate more welcoming? And how can we make our research more inclusive in terms of the sort of diverse ways that people may think about wildlife and challenges that are undergoing wildlife and wildlife populations?
Thanks, Alan. So a little bit of a context in the Rubenstein School. We have been addressing, I've been in the Rubenstein School for about 18 years. And prior to my coming, there had been measures and initiatives to address diversity in the curriculum. There's been a long-standing class. There have been committees, ad hoc, and other initiatives in the school to ask these questions and recruit, support BIPOC student, staff, and faculty. So across those many years, we've possibly distilled our work into these guiding principles. And these guiding principles that I'll go over in a moment informed what we just completed as an inclusive excellence plan. That is, we are one unit amongst all the academic units, all the administrative units at the university, a university-wide initiative to bring all of our ideas, initiatives, programs together. In the Rubenstein School, these are our guiding principles that all members feel welcome and included. And we can't make any assumptions about that. There needs to be relationship and communication to really get at what is it that our different constituents, different members of our community need to feel welcome and included. That equity is centered in our curriculum, in our business practices, and in our policies. What we've experienced over the years is that equity has to be at the table and amongst the questions in every meeting, not just an add-on, not just the thing that you tick off at the bottom of a checklist, but it has to be integral to from the beginning to the end. There needs to be opportunities for personal and professional growth. So in the Rubenstein School, we do have a DEI portion of every faculty retreat that happens twice a year. There are several programs and professional development opportunities across campus. And these can't be just one-offs. They need to be reflected upon and integrated and open to all. And we include opportunities for diversity as not just racial diversity, but all the ways that diversity might express themselves at our institutions. We also are very attentive to if and how our curriculum reflects different perspectives and ways of knowing. There are many ways to be an environmentalist. I'm sure that if I asked you right now to hold in your head the picture of an environmentalist, examine who that person is, what they're wearing, what they're doing. And it's a challenge for some of us to think outside of those particular images that we're steeped in. Integral, important to everything that we do, we deeply believe that equity equals healthy ecological systems. So now we're going to cover a little bit about what we as a faculty and staff have created and are implementing as the diversity, equity, and inclusion curricula in the school. And pictured here are our seniors, graduated May 22, that were in New York City, speaking with high school students during I think it was an event in Manhattan. And I'll give it over to Alan to talk about one of our classes.
Great, thanks, Marie. So Marie will talk about a course that's kind of in the heart of a lot of the DEI work that we do in the school. But one of the things that we realized as we were continuing to teach that course over the years is that we were kind of putting students in a little bit of a disadvantage when they came in as first-time, first-year students and really were asked to dig into some of these challenging issues about identity, about power, about privilege, about how that relates to their work in the environment and natural resource field. So what we did probably now like 4 or 5 years ago was instituted a fall semester class for our first time, first year students, which is called Critical Reflection and Dialogue. And one of the things that we know when we bring when our students enter as first time, first years, is they are just incredibly passionate about the environmental work that they want to do. Whether that's conservation of endangered and threatened species, whether that's solving climate change, whether that's, figuring out ways that forests can sequester more carbon. They're just incredibly passionate about those things, but they lack some of the tools that are really needed to talk to one another about different ways to make that happen. And so this course, Critical Reflection and Dialogue, really focuses on two things. One is building relationships. So getting students together, being able to talk to one another, being comfortable with one another, that they can share some diverse perspectives about ways in which we can think about environmental problem solving. And then the second part of that is skill building. So we really focused on those two skills, critical reflection and dialogue. With critical reflection, we're really using that primarily as a writing skill. So students are asked to really delve into complex environmental challenges, primarily looking at social ecological systems and thinking about the different ways in which their identity, their perspective interacts with the way that they think about environmental solutions. And then the second is really trying to build their skills around dialogue. So ways in which students can ask probing questions, can think about using conversation as a way to deepen their understanding of issues rather than thinking about that as a debate structure where they're really trying to get their point across and show that their perspective is the right way to get at an environmental issue. So the idea in this course is essentially to set them up to build community, to develop their skills, and send them into the spring semester to be able to take on these really more challenging issues that Marie will talk about in the next slide.
Thanks, Alan. So yes, the fall semester, as Alan had said, is meant to build skills and build relationship and get a little practice around critical reflection and dialogue. And we pick up on those skills in the spring semester through a 3-credit race and culture and natural resources course. So the structure of the course is, for example, this fall, we will welcome 279 first-year students into the Rubenstein School. And on a Tuesday, they'll come together in plenary where we will have for an hour and 20 minutes share content. For example, the history of racism, redlining, frameworks such as intent and impact. So on Tuesdays, they'll have the content. And then on Thursdays, we gather together in small group discussions. So the facilitators, the instructors that they were familiar with from the fall will serve as the discussion leaders, discussion facilitators in the spring. So there is that continuum, that thread of relationship. And over the course of the semester, the content, the practices, we have guest speakers come in and share their experiences in the environmental field. And these are our objectives in that class. And I mentioned conceptual frameworks, the equity lens. We have students really practice what it would be like to look at home issues or issues that are really important to them through these different frameworks. As we said earlier, critical reflection and dialogue really comes to bear because it's a 3-credit course. There's more writing, there's more substantive conversation, And we hope that there'll be some tension as well, because we're really trying to deconstruct some of the assumptions we might have about who is in the environment and what environmentalism should look like. The history around race, racism, and anti-racism in the environment covers particularly how environmental burdens have disproportionately fallen on BIPOC folks and folks of less means. And that comes often with realizations on the students' part. And I should say that students coming in have already been very knowledgeable and aware of these dynamics. So the conversations can be very, very rich. And as facilitators, we listen as well as guide their learning around how to address these problems and how to become environmental leaders. And then at the end of the semester, we do come together to think about how do we want to move forward, what actions can we take in our different circles of influence. So that rounds out their first year. And it hopefully contributes to changing the narrative of environmental work. And in this photo, we feature alumni from the Rubenstein School. Although we've had smaller percentages of people of color here in the Rubenstein School, somewhere between 10 to 12% of our undergraduate population in the Rubenstein School identify themselves as BIPOC, which is a few points lower than University of Vermont at large. They are leaders. They graduate, they have great experience in their 4 years, and they graduate into some excellent opportunities. The folks here represent environmental scientists, folks that are studying for their master's and PhD in critical ecology, folks that have been leaders in the outdoor industry, and folks that have been dedicated to working within the community to lift up their home communities. So we're really proud, and we stay connected with our alumni of color.
Great. So one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about is essentially the syllabus. Oftentimes, literally, this is the first connection that that faculty will make with students. And so thinking about how do we use this syllabus, this document, to really get off on the right foot with students. And so, I think the first thing is to really think about the language and the tone of the syllabus in terms of setting the intentions. Oftentimes, we find that really personalizing the message that you give to students at the very beginning of the semester, some background about yourself, some background about your own identity, your positionality, your familiarity with diversity, equity, inclusion in the environmental field can be really helpful in terms of having students understand your own perspective in terms of thinking about the way in which you present new content to them. A second aspect that we've been working with faculty in the Rubenstein School is a diversity and inclusion statement. And we've really tried to emphasize that this is something that we want faculty to personalize. We don't want to put boilerplate content out there that everyone is going to copy and paste into their syllabus, but something that can be meaningful and really presents the way in which faculty think about DEI and how that intersects with the course material. Talking about the way in which this class serves different identities, talking about, treating students with respect, equal opportunity to students to focus on their own learning, and invitation to students. If I, as a faculty member, as your instructor, make a misstep, give students the invitation to come to you and talk about these issues. Learning students' names is, and I should just mention there that I think it's really important, as opposed to having that as a statement that's just essentially sitting in the syllabus, to literally read it to students so that they actually see this is a a true intent of yours in terms of the way that you are going to work with them on integrating the content of the course with issues around equity and inclusion. Learning students' names I just find it's really important. And obviously, sometimes you're going to have a huge class where that's going to be essentially impossible to do. But I think one of the things that we talk a lot about here in the Rubenstein School in particular is that if you are over the first couple classes of the semester going to actually take attendance, look through the roster before the semester begins and think about names that you might have trouble pronouncing. I think there's no worse way to set up a non-inclusive environment than to, butcher students' names on the first day of class. So take the time, email a student, ask for a phonetic pronunciation of their name, and they really appreciate that rather than you struggling through a challenging pronunciation. It's also, I think, really important to be engaged with a student and transparent about your expectations. Too many syllabi read like legal documents, and making sure that not only are you setting expectations for the students, but that the students should have some expectations of you as well, and ensuring that this is really it's a two-way street in terms of our engagement and learning with students. And then finally, one way that I think can be really helpful with the classroom climate is to co-create community agreements. And we have sort of a number of these that we've created with students in the past. But thinking about those expectations and the ways in which you'd like to see this class move forward, creating those with students can be really helpful in terms of thinking about expectations over the course of the semester. So as a few examples we have here, you can go to the next slide, Marie. In this case, rather than community agreements, we call these best practices for learning, but you can read through a few of these. And I think a lot of them are, probably ones that many of you have incorporated into classrooms before. I love to talk about number 2 with the students: expect and accept non-closure. A lot of the, environment, natural resource, fish and wildlife issues that we're talking about oftentimes are messy in terms of the way in which we need to think about how do we engage stakeholders, how do we integrate equity, what are some of the resource challenges we have, both with financial and personnel. And getting students to really think about the fact that many of these don't have, essentially yes or no answers, but are really complex, can be very helpful in terms of getting them to really think more deeply about these challenges. But lots of these best practices for learning and community agreements can be ones that you can work with the students to set up to help set expectations for how this class will move forward as the semester goes along.
And Alan, I'm just going to pick up on, you have number 2 is one that, we talk a fair bit about. And I often find that 4B, assuming good intent and attending to impacts, is always worthwhile of discussion. We all practice and hope that we practice, do our actions with the best of intent, and inevitably that best of intent can land very wrong on some folks. And so it's not a either or, it's there is an intent and there is always an impact, and addressing that impact is really important. And it doesn't have to be in that moment. As an instructor, I know oftentimes I've said the wrong thing, I've made a mistake, I've stumbled, and that happens when something in your gut says, something just happened. And you can always address that impact. If not in that moment, I have come back a couple of weeks later and said, I said that thing a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sensing that there has been a change in our dynamic, and can we stop for a moment? I'd like to apologize, or I'd like to stop and reflect upon this. So it's that's one of my most operational frameworks that serves well in lots of situations. And the other thing that I'll point to is the platinum rule. We are so accustomed to the golden rule, where we treat others as we wish to be treated. And in true inclusion, we would want to treat others the way they want to be treated. So students really, they tuck into those practices, and they're fodder for really good discussion.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Marie, that the idea behind the platinum rule is, you might ask the question, well, how would I know how someone else wants to be treated? And that is really the idea behind dialogue, to be able to understand other people's perspectives.
Mhm.
You want to start?
Looking at each other. Sure. So we've got some other promising practices. We know that there's other practices out there amongst you. Here are some that have served us really well. So including diverse voices and content in syllabus, it makes a difference. Looking at the readings, that are they representative of different voices and different experiences? Are your speakers representative of different voices and experiences? Having that variety doesn't mean that we come away from maybe the pieces of content that are most that we feel need to be part of the content, but it demonstrates to the students that I have been rigorous in my own thinking about the teaching, what I want to convey, and that I truly want to have a really interesting and thought-provoking conversation around these really different issues.
Yeah, and so we're not saying, I mean, we've been using this amazing book called Colors of Nature in our race and culture and natural resources class. And we're not saying throw away Sand County Almanac. There's some, amazing lessons that students learn from Aldo Leopold. But integrate those. Think about ways to include multiple voices, diverse voices. And one of the ways that we've been doing that in the school is what we call a BIPOC speaker series. And so a number of years ago, through some philanthropy, a gift fund, we've actually been able to give really generous honoraria for BIPOC speakers to come to our classes and talk about their environmental work, their work in the Fish and Wildlife Program. And this has been really great for students to hear from diverse community members, diverse environmental leaders, and think about different perspectives in terms of ways that we can think about environmental problem solving. And I think for our faculty, this has been really great in terms of, I don't want to say sort of taking them, letting them off the hook, but it's been great in terms of giving them flexibility and essentially permission to go out to BIPOC environmental leaders and come to a class. And this really enables them to expand on the content that they're providing in their class.
And then the second bullet point, be honest and realistic about your capacity and what you can offer. I'd like to believe that I am the foremost expert on the thing that I studied for my research. I am not the foremost expert when it comes to all things DEI. And it's really important to own that so that we can have a really authentic conversation in our classrooms. So there's that importance of owning what our capacity is. Being honest about our capacity means that I will have my blind spots and they will show up, and the students will pick up on that. And that's more an invitation to talk about these things in community. And it's amazing how impactful it can be for a student to see how a professor, the person that is considered the person running the room, is also grappling with these questions. It's a really great learning moment. And also when I think about putting together either a class or a syllabus, being clear on what it is that I can deliver, what it is that I can support my students with, and knowing what resources I can point them to when I cannot help them or I cannot assist them. That might look like being aware of, for instance, the Mosaic Center for Students of Color here on campus. If a student is seeking community, I know that I can send them or invite them to go to that community to find shared experiences. So having a really good understanding of who I am, my biases, and what I can deliver demonstrates to the students that I really care about their experience in my classroom.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. And I see there's a question in the Q&A or a comment, really. Students know when a DEI statement is just a copy paste in a syllabus and conveys a lack of sincerity around DEI. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at about being honest and realistic. And it goes into the next bullet about essentially being humble and understanding that we're all on our own, learning journeys, and we're, constantly pushing up against our learning edge. But really, not just listening to what the students have to say, but I'm sure, like we do here, also experts on your faculty, folks who are, are really kind of pushing boundaries in terms of the way that they're integrating DEI into their coursework, and listening to other faculty, not being afraid to go ask for advice. But I think the humility piece is really important in terms of understanding that we all have a lot to learn. Humans are incredibly diverse, and the way that we interact with both the natural world and each other is essentially means there's going to be an infinite variety of outcomes. And understanding the diversity in your classroom, as well as the way that DEI issues intersect with your course content it's a lifelong learning journey.
So the next bullet point, predominantly white institutions must do the work. You probably already know, Vermont and University of Vermont are majority white. And a lot of the labor does fall on the marginalized folks to lead, to be involved, and it's incumbent upon the majority folks to support that and also lead the way. I so appreciate my partners and colleagues and dear friends like Alan, who are thought partners, who use their privilege and power in service to building an inclusive community and asking the hard questions. For years, we would hear that critical mass will change the systems. And while we do have students that will activate and have been instrumental in changing policies on our campus, it really is up to the leadership, up to the majority folks to lead the way and be allies in these efforts. It might take a little bit of courage, and it's often uncomfortable, but the saying goes, a high tide lifts all boats, and it really translates into excellent learning for all of us.
I think one of the things that we've been, I think the term that we've been using is inclusive environmental professional or inclusive fish and wildlife professional, and thinking about asking that question of our students. What does that look like? What is that going to look like when you graduate? Here in Vermont, we are not a racially diverse state, but we know students are going to be, working all over the globe, and asking them that question, what does that look like to you to be an inclusive natural resource professional? So we wanted to also bring up anti-racist practices and code of conduct in research labs. And this is, let me see if I can let that go. We've got I put a couple examples in the chat from some faculty members in our school, Dr. Carol Adair and Dr. Rochelle Gould. And I saw the question that came up early, can we add how to make graduate advisors demonstrate more inclusive behavior toward their underrepresented graduate students to that list? And this is something that has really can sometimes be challenging because oftentimes graduate advising really is kind of a, it's sort of a personalized experience. The way in which we interact with our graduate students is not something that, necessarily gets a tremendous amount of oversight from, from administration. And so, we oftentimes look at, how much grant money you bring in or how many publications you have, as opposed to the climate in that research lab. And so there's some really great examples that I put in the chat around anti-racist practices and code of conduct in research labs. How do you make your research lab feel inclusive? And, you can think about, just for starters, what are we essentially asking our students to do when you think about, going out into the field, going out into perhaps areas where they may not feel safe or may not feel welcome? How do we have students interact with perhaps language barriers? And there's, a lot of different ways, and we can certainly be happy to talk more about this, but, thinking again about ways that we can have faculty interact with each other. There are a lot of faculty who are thinking very deeply about this and using those faculty who are on the cutting edge as, essentially leaders for your department or your unit.
And the last point here, the community of practice, there are bodies within the Rubenstein School that are thinking about the DEI initiatives and inclusive community. One of them is our IDEA committee, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Action, which is a governance body within the school that looks at initiatives and policy making and changing. Ideally, that IDEA committee works in tandem with a community of practice, which can be ad hoc folks that include undergrads, graduate students, faculty, and staff that come together. This past year, they came together twice a month to bring questions to the conversation, to bring resources to the conversation. And it's a way of continued learning amongst ourselves, where we know that nobody is an expert, and we want to share our challenges as well as our successes with each other. It's been highly effective and great community building within the school. Next slide, Alan.
Well, yeah, I'll say one last thing, and this is, not necessarily that this is the only way to develop a community of practice, but what we've used in that community of practice is essentially modeled after Black Lives Matter, which is heart work, head work, and leg work. And so we always start those community of practice meetings with heart work, which is just a way to get to know each other and to really build relationships before we jump into doing something. And so it's really created a community that that feels like we have some, some love and respect of one another. And I think it makes the legwork, the action we do, or the head work, the thinking that we do, much deeper. And I think people are much more willing to really speak their mind and help you think, much more holistically about some of the issues that we're bringing up. Okay, next slide. Well, this is great because we are right on time, and now we're going to ask you to do a little bit of work. What we'd like to do is give you about 5 minutes for a free write, and 1 minute per bullet isn't really a lot. So if there are some that you'd really like to focus on, feel free. But we've got 5 questions here that we were thinking could be helpful in terms of really sort of spurring a little bit of conversation or some Q&A in ways that we could essentially help guide the last 15 minutes of the conversation. And so for these, what I'd like you to do, and we're really kind of thinking about this, I think we might have lost the rewrite, Marie.
Oh, uh-oh.
So these are, I'll just read through them really quickly. What are some DEI practices that resonate with you or are currently happening in your unit? What are you personally doing well? What is challenging for you? What is your unit or department doing well? And what are the greatest challenges for your unit or department? And, just as kind of a, I guess, to be honest about the way we're approaching this is really trying to think about this from a position of strength. Many of us, oftentimes think, oh, DEI, we're not doing it well. We need to get faculty engaged. But there are lots of good things that either your department is doing well or you personally are doing well. Think about those first before you go to challenges. And I think that's a really much more helpful way to start the conversation. So we'll give you 5 minutes to write, and then we'll open this up for Q&A. And Mike, if you want to add anything, feel free.
I think you covered it well. I just would like to add, so the individual that had the earlier comment about the advisors and how we might be able to help them consider their students with a little more equity. I think you've covered that already, but if that individual would like to get additional comments to that, please let us know.
All right, we'll give you 1 more minute to wrap up. All right, well, thanks a lot. Hopefully that give you a few minutes to really think through maybe some questions you might have, or some, maybe some insights or some advice we might be able to give. I saw we lost a few participants during the free write, so you are the brave ones that have stuck around. You can pat yourself on the back. Mike, do you have any that you want to make sense for us to start with?
The question on, a challenge my department faces DEI's practices is that many of our courses are taught in asynchronous and online format. Some of us try to entice the students to participate in introductory Zoom meets in an effort to get to know them. However, as many well know, participation is sketchy when there's no grade involved. And I think that's a really important question now when we have a lot more online classes. And I think that's a trend that's going to be continuing. Do you have any thoughts on how we could try to incorporate some of the stuff that you talked about here in those online classes more?
Yeah, maybe I can maybe mention a couple of things, and then Marie, feel free to jump in. One, I mean, we've got a couple of different tools that that we use with our our learning management system. So ways in which to essentially give some incentives for participation in discussion boards, or participation in providing some peer review or feedback on other students' work. The other thing that I'll just mention, and this is one that I think has really resonated with our faculty, is when we talk about equity, I think sometimes it's challenging for maybe for each of us to always see the equity component in a natural resource or environmental issue. And I always resort to asking the student that question. What's the equity issue here? Because there always is one. There is always an equity issue whenever we're talking about a natural resource problem. And so essentially giving students that as, any kind of in any assignment, what's the equity issue? They don't necessarily have a chance to talk about it with themselves, but it's an opportunity for them to think about how that integrates into the work that they're doing, or the content of that course.
You're muted, Marie.
Thanks. No, that's a good strategy, and I'll add it's a challenge when there isn't the incentive of a grade for students to get involved. Often I'll go to the pragmatic, why is this important to your academic career? And I'll say that employers, regardless of what sector you're in, regardless of what field you're in, employers are looking for diversity. They're looking for employees that can talk the walk and walk the talk. They're looking for folks that will represent their market share. So this kind of information and content and skill will serve them in the long run in getting the internship, the research project, and the job, or the graduate school. So I'm hoping that lands on ears that say, well, okay, this is meaningful to me because it's going to help me get a job. So there's that. And then the other thought that I have, which is in response to Michelle's question about emotions and having eco grief and climate anxiety and celebration and joy be part of the learning as well, is that building community in a classroom is possible online. I don't know about asynchronous, but I have done it asynchronously. And can we compel students to be part of a learning community that appeals to their heart as well as their head? Can we talk about how hard it is to experience climate change and the possibilities that are in front of us, and how we can be leaders in that, and leaders across the different experiences that we all embody as well as witness? So building community and relationship, I hope, is compelling enough for students to get to engage.
Would you guys mind addressing the question by Henry? How do you accomplish the outcomes that we want in an environment where diversity issues are politicized and where court decisions roll back initiatives already in place? You know, how do we deal with the internal university politics that we have to when we're trying to achieve these goals?
Yeah, so yes, it is really challenging. And, you know, one of the things that also, when we talk about putting a DEI statement in a syllabus is, you know, also thinking about political identity as, you know, one other form or measure of one's identity. And, you know, I think, you know, probably in our school, as maybe in many others, you know, we really lean left. And so our politics often show through in terms of the way that we talk about environmental issues. So, you know, I guess kind of getting away maybe specifically from the politics, but thinking about how do we give students the tools to really think through many of these issues holistically. So, you know, it's really easy to get stuck on a Supreme Court decision or on a funding decision or on the ideology of a university president, for example. But really getting students to think through, okay, what does it mean if we're thinking about, you know, how are we integrating equity here? How do we make sure that students that walk through the door of our building feel like they're a member of our community? That is, you know, I think it's a starting point anyway. I'm not sure it necessarily answers the question, but I know you have the answer, Marie.
I was going to say I don't have the answer. I think we're grappling with that right now. I mean, there's policy, for example, that's going to impact our recruitment initiatives. So there's that on the front, at the front facing. And then there's actually, I think we forget that we have our own power personally with our students and in the relationships that we have, that even though, and this might be a risky example, I might not be able to make a plug to admit that person that contributes diversity to the school, but I can be as welcoming as I can be to families and students and colleagues around issues that are important to the diversifying our communities in the school. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I can work around those structures and build relationship that will also accomplish the important outcomes of creating leaders, facilitating leadership that is going to create solutions for the broadest spectrum of people and planet.
So I think we have time for a couple of more questions, hopefully. One of them I think is really interesting from Ellen. How have you thoughtfully taught conservation history that often involves individuals that promote racist ideas and actions, but also have contributed positively to conservation? One of the things that I just want to comment about this is one of the things that I teach as part of our curriculum is a course that really emphasizes that people aren't good and bad. They've had very different experiences that lead them to respond to kind of external stimuli differently. And that we should be very careful about, trying to categorize people based on that. But, go ahead. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it.
You want to start, Marie?
I'm from California, so sure, I'm familiar with John Muir, and I'm from Fresno, California, and so Yosemite is kind of our backyard. And I love the national parks. I love the idea of the national parks. I know the history of the national parks. And I think we do our students the best service when we train them, invite them to hold those opposing truths or multiple truths together. There are the implications of these great men decisions and their accomplishments. And it's so important to think critically about how do they come to that idea? What other ideas spoke to those ideas? Eugenics is one of them. And what has happened since then? And now in my position of power in many places, how do I change that, deconstruct it, decolonize it? Those are skills, critical thinking skills that we should be teaching all of our students.
Like to add anything to that, Alan?
I guess I would just say that I think just understanding history is important, and building, sort of a broader context for our students is really something that we try to do in these introductory classes. So I think the two of you have covered it really well.
Well, my clock says it's 12:59 right now, so I don't think we should jump into another question unless you guys see something you want to address in the next 30 seconds or so. I think we're going to be cut off.
I think this points to accept non-closure. It's been wonderful being a part of this. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I can see some of the folks in the chat have also put some nice resources up there as well. So, and we've also put some in also. And I think this is recording will be, well, you can take it away, Larkin.
Yeah, no, thank you both. And my understanding is that the recording will be available through the Wildlife Society's webpage where these webinars are housed. And we'll try to get a link to it from our working group's webpage as well. But thank you very much, Alan and Marie, for your help, and good again to work with you, Mike. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And if you're interested in continuing the conversations that I've seen in the chat question and answer thing here, one way to do that is to join the college and university education working group, and we'll continue those discussions. Part of that can be there's a symposium on curricula that includes a couple of these issues at Louisville at the next TWS conference. So look forward to seeing you all there, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.